The face shields being made in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I showed you the surgical gowns also being made in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, but now more and more parts of the city are coming into the game to help out. More and more companies are doing remarkable things. I talked to you a few days ago about the fact that when we found, despite every attempt, we found we couldn't get the test kits we needed from the federal government. We couldn't purchase them anywhere in the quantities we needed. We said, we're going to make them right here. And you're going to be seeing the results of that in just days. So it has been a remarkable journey against a very painful backdrop. But now, today, I want to tell you about another important step. And it has a lot to say with how we will protect ourselves now, but it also says a lot about how we will protect ourselves in the future. And today, I want to talk to you about ventilators. And you see one here, and we're going to get a little demonstration in a moment. But as you can see immediately, this is not a simple piece of machinery. This is something complex. This is something challenging to make. Nothing like this was being made in New York City just 2 months ago, even 1 month ago. Nothing like this was being produced here. But extraordinary entrepreneurs came together for the good of all New Yorkers and said, we can do it. We can do something, whether it seems possible or not, we're going to find a way. So I want to take you back just to remind you, just a few short weeks ago, and I use that specific day, Sunday, April 5th, was the day where we felt, based on every projection, based on all the evidence, that we were going to be at a point where we might run out of ventilators. The number of people who needed them was growing every day. And it was a very fearful time. Supplies were running short. We needed answers. At that moment, it looked like we could get to a point where there might not be that ventilator needed for the next patient. Thank God, right around then was when things started to improve, and it's all because of everything you have done, all of you. The social distancing, the shelter in place, all of the things that have been making a difference. So today we can say that, thank God, we have the ventilators to get through this week. We have the ventilators for the immediate future. But as recently as the first days of April, the numbers were staggering. Approximately 220 more New Yorkers each day, more each day, needed a ventilator. That's what it looked like at the beginning of April. And that's when this valiant effort was going full bore to make sure that ventilators would be available and would be ready if they needed to be pressed into emergency service, these homegrown ventilators. And this is the epitome of that kind of wartime production model. People coming up with an idea and making it happen, because if it hadn't been for these ventilators being ready, we might have been in a situation where there would not have been one for someone. By April 10th, we were still seeing an increase in the number of people who needed them each day, 75 a day, but it was slowing, thank God. Now, today, it's actually leveled off. And we hope to see a situation where it really declines consistently, the need each day. But having gone through that terrifying moment, I can tell you I am determined to make sure that New York City never, ever is in a situation in the future where we need ventilators and we can't get them. We have to protect our people. And so these bridge ventilators that have been created are part of what will protect us now and into the future. This is something we now have that can never be taken away from us. This is something we make here that there's no one else in the world can deprive us of. We are now increasingly self-sufficient. We got a long way to go. But this is a remarkable achievement. You're going to hear from some of the people who made it happen. I want to tell you, these ventilators right now, ready to go, being moved into hospitals so they will all have a reserve that need them. FDA approved. And I want to thank the FDA. I want to take a moment. I always try and give credit where credit is due. Dr. Stephen Hahn and his remarkable team at the FDA. I spoke to him several times. I know Dr. Mitch Katz did as well from Health and Hospitals. They moved this process in record time. And I really want to give them credit. FDA is not historically known for speed, but they have in this crisis really stepped up. And they were tremendous partners in getting this ventilator approved and ready. Now, this story, again, it is about making something out of nothing, and that is a New York tradition, doing remarkable things against the odds. And there's three guys who deserve particular credit. Scott Cohen, of New Lab, Marcel Bota of 10X Beta, and Charles Boyce of Boyce Technologies. These individuals had a remarkable civic spirit, a remarkable desire to get something done. And I want to give special credit to Charles because he also was one of the driving forces behind making those face shields that right now, when you see them out there in our communities, in fact, just yesterday I was in Staten Island, deliveries of PPEs were being made to Rumsey, to the hospital in Staten Island, and there were those Brooklyn Navy Yard face shields being delivered. And that made me very, very proud to be there with those delivery workers, seeing the response from all the healthcare workers to that help coming. So a special thanks to Charles for being a part of both these efforts. So when we think of this city, we think about chutzpah, we think about the incredible verve, the drive, the ability to do something no matter how brash or unlikely. So literally, people who are part of this effort had to say to themselves, hey, we've never made a ventilator before. We're going to have to figure out how to do it, and then we're going to have to figure out how to produce thousands of them. You know, if you talked about a normal timeline to try and create a brand new product like this, you'd think it would take a year. You know what they said? They said, we have to do it in a month or less. And they went and did it. So they put together a team, an extraordinary New York City team of scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, physicians, folks who knew the regulatory system, all sorts of folks who worked together, nonstop work, literally around the clock, 24-hour efforts over the past 3 weeks, and they got it done. So what do these bridge ventilators do? Well, what they mean is when someone needs that urgent help, that ability to breathe, without which they simply won't survive, these bridge ventilators are there, keep someone alive. They can play different kinds of roles. They can buy time to keep a patient alive who might need a more elaborate kind of help from a full-service ventilator. They can help to stretch out the capacity of a hospital so that as they're getting more of those full-service ventilators available at any given moment, they buy time to save lives. They also work with a number of different kinds of cases where there are less severe issues, but that people need that help breathing. So there's many things they do. To make this possible, to save lives, to make sure we could be self-sufficient, we, the city of New York, made the decision to work with these companies to help coordinate their efforts, to work with the FDA on the approval, but also to make clear that we would fund the effort. And so we placed an order for 3,000 of these ventilators, a $10 million order. And that raises a crucial point that what these extraordinary New Yorkers did was not only create a great product and a necessary product, but a product that was affordable. It's over $3,000 for each ventilator, and that compares to $40,000 or $50,000 or more for a full-service ventilator. This means that we have a ready reserve in the event that this crisis continues or, God forbid, this disease becomes stronger. It means we're in a position to protect ourselves and to help others who may need our help. But it also is now the beginning of something much bigger that will help frame our future. Today, I'm announcing that we're going to create a New York City strategic reserve. We have learned the hard way that we cannot depend on the federal government in the future. I hate saying that, but I think it's quite evident. We certainly cannot depend on the global market. We can't depend on our nation to produce products that tragically are not being produced enough in this nation, as we've seen in our hour of need. I hope that will change. I hope our country gets the message that we have to start producing these things all over the country again and be self-sufficient as a nation. But until that day comes, New York City, we will protect ourselves. With the leadership of the Economic Development Corporation and working with our healthcare leadership, we will create our own reserve. We will take the production that's now been created in those 4 areas, the face shields, the surgical gowns, the test kits, and now the ventilators. We're going to create a ready supply of those so we'll always have enough in the future, and we'll purchase what we need and create a stockpile so we will never be in a situation where we turn to those who are supposed to supply this and they say, sorry, we're all out. We, New Yorkers, will take care of ourselves. Now, I have to say This all was created from scratch. And I remember the day I first went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard and I saw those face shields being made by hand. There's no machinery. It was all by hand. It reminded me that people would do whatever it took. We've seen it now, 4 whole different kinds of products being produced in large quantities, protecting our healthcare workers, saving lives. This is our future, to be able to take care of ourselves. And now that we figured out we can do these things, whatever we need in the future, we can use as a blueprint to build more and different supplies and equipment, whatever the occasion may be, whatever the challenge may be. I also want you to know that in the process of these good people figuring out how to create this ventilator, they found out that there was a lot of interest in this ventilator from hospital systems and absolutely in other parts of the world as well. So in fact, there will be a market for hospitals and for parts of America and other countries that need lower cost ventilators. This has started to open up a new possibility of getting people help who aren't getting it right now because the cost is so prohibitive. And any of our fellow cities and states that need help, our reserve will be there to help them just the way they've helped us. So we've been so appreciative to other states, other cities that have stepped up to help New York City. Any of them that need our help in this crisis, we will be there for them because we will have a reserve that's available and that we can depend on. You're going to hear a little more in a moment about these ventilators, but let me give you a couple of other updates first. Because we know, and this is part of why we want these reserves, we know we're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. We've got a lot more to do. And we also know that the impact of this disease is being felt right now. Still too many people dying, too many people going into the hospital right now, too many people going into the ICU right now because of COVID-19. This fight is raging, and it's raging especially in the parts of the city that have been hardest hit, that have unfortunately had the worst disparities, the biggest burdens, the least health care available historically, and that means our communities of color and our immigrant communities, our lower income communities. We need to fight back, and we're going to do that in a lot of ways. We've talked about all the community outreach we're going to do, the telehealth programs, everything we're going to do to reach people, but obviously it also will take more and more testing at the grassroots level. Yesterday, we, as of yesterday, had 5 community-based sites opened in some of our hardest hit neighborhoods. Those sites will be performing 3,600 tests this week, so they're all up and running. I'll go over them in a second, but they will do 3,600 tests this week. Next week, we'll add 5 more sites in hard-hit areas, and we will get that total up to over 7,000 tests per week, and we're going to keep growing from there. If we can get the supply of testing we need, plus the PPEs and the personnel, we're going to keep going farther and farther with the grassroots testing where it's needed most. The 5 centers are now open in Brooklyn, and they're all health and hospitals, I should say. The Gotham Health Center in East New York, in the Bronx, the Gotham Health Center in Morrisania, in Staten Island, the Vanderbilt Health Center, in Manhattan, the Sydenham Family Health Center, in Harlem, in Queens, at Queens Hospital, the testing center there. All of these are walk-in sites. So I want to emphasize, anyone from the community, and these are targeted to the immediate community, you can walk up. We are prioritizing people who are 65 years old or older and who have those pre-existing conditions that we've talked about so much, those serious conditions that put people in danger. So please, if you meet those criteria, if you are someone who is in a particularly vulnerable situation, we want to get you tested. Go to one of those centers, walk up. That testing has started, is available today, and then more will be announced next week. I now want to talk about what we do every day, looking at the indicators that tell us where we are. And I keep telling people it's going to be a long battle. We want to see them all move in the right direction. It's not always going to work that way, but it doesn't change anything about how we approach this. We keep fighting, we keep sticking to what's working, and we will see progress. And overall, we have. Even though these indicators have not been everything we want them to be, we definitely see some real movement, and that's really good news. So first, the daily number of people admitted to hospitals for suspected COVID-19, well, that went down from 212 to 204. That's good news. The number of people in ICUs across our health and hospitals facilities for suspected COVID-19, that went up, but by very little, from 853 to 857. The percentage of people who tested positive for COVID-19 also went up, but again by very little, from 34% to 35%. The number of people who tested positive through our public health lab tests went down from 67% to 63%. So again, you see some progress when some of the areas going up. They're only going up by a little. Overall, we are seeing definite progress. Not everything that we're looking for to get to the point where we can relax some of the restrictions, but definite progress for sure. So keep doing what you're doing, New Yorkers. It is working. Just let's keep with it. It'll take some time, but we can do it. Now, I always want to offer my thanks to anyone and everyone who stands up for New York City. And today we're talking about great stories of New Yorkers doing things for their fellow New Yorkers, but also a lot of the time people have come to our aid so we could help ourselves. And I talked to you about surgical gowns yesterday. This is our toughest situation right now with PPEs. And it got to the point where we couldn't get, it's just quite clear, the global market isn't functioning right. No matter what you try, you can't get the kind of supply that we need. But we said, okay, if we can't get the gowns ready-made, can we get the fabric? I mentioned yesterday we worked with the White House, particularly with Peter Navarro and his team, who have been fantastic. And they put us in touch with leaders in the textile and garment industry who have been really helpful. Special thank you to Kim Glass, who's one of the leaders of the industry, who's been giving us great help. They connect us to a healthcare supply company, Owens and Minor in North Carolina. And they went to bat for us. A special thank you to Chris Lowry and everyone at Owens and Minor. I was on the phone with them several times. They have already delivered, in a matter of days, they produced and delivered to New York City 1 million square yards of American-made fabric. And I want to emphasize what a refreshing reality this is, that we're not searching for something in another country that may or may not let us have it. This is American-made fabric, waterproof fabric, that we can turn into surgical gowns. So 1 million square yards already here. That will create enough for 400,000 more surgical gowns. And I have an update on the day by which they will all be produced. They will all be ready and done by May 10th. And that production is going to be expanding constantly as we create more and more of these gowns in New York City. Special thank you to folks at UPS, Laura Lane and everybody at UPS. They jumped in immediately to make sure that the delivery from North Carolina, 570 miles away, and it happened the second that the fabric came off the assembly line, it came to New York City in record time. So incredible team effort to help us help ourselves, and we're very, very appreciative. I want to say one more thing before I close. We gather today, and normally if our society was functioning as normal, there would be very solemn remembrances today because it's Holocaust Remembrance Day. There'd be solemn ceremonies, moments to reflect. And not just for the Jewish community and our Jewish brothers and sisters, but for everyone to learn the lessons of the Holocaust, to think about what it means, and to always gain strength from the incredible examples of people who fought their way through. One of the most painful realities of these last weeks is some of the people we lost to the coronavirus were Holocaust survivors. Think about that. They lived through one of the greatest atrocities in human history and then succumbed to the coronavirus. We have to learn a lesson from all of them, even those we've lost, and certainly from those who still survive. And I've met so many of them, particularly in Brooklyn and areas I used to represent in the city council, where I constantly would meet people who would tell me their stories of fighting through and surviving the Holocaust, and it was extraordinarily inspirational. We got to realize that there are people right now in our city who stared down unspeakable evil, who dealt with unthinkable pain and terror and overcame it and fought through it and decided that they would not only survive, but they would create a new life with new families, new hope. They would sustain their people, their beliefs, their faith, and they did it. And some of those stories, when you're talking to some of these individuals, you are humbled. I am humbled. I know it because it reminds you of the greatness that's possible in each of us and what those who have gone before have done, and it inspires us. So we need to endure right now. We need to overcome, and we need to learn from all of those who went before, but particularly those extraordinary noble Holocaust survivors. They're teaching us a lesson right now that we should take to heart in this moment. lastly, you know, the last days, I've made it a point to be very straightforward, very honest with all New Yorkers, with all of you about what we face, the fact we have a long battle, the things we can do and the things that we can't yet do. You know, it was no fun to have to tell you that May events had to be canceled and then June events had to be canceled, including some of the events we love the most each year, we cherish, we look forward to. It's no fun to tell you you have to keep social distancing and staying home, but it's the right thing to do, and you're doing it, again, with extraordinary ability. We had to say that those things couldn't happen, those parades, those concerts, those street fairs. I had to say it just isn't time for them yet. There's still too many unknowns. There's still too many threats. There's a lot we don't know, but there's one thing we do know for sure. The day is coming when this city will fight our way back, when this city will get back to normal. The day is coming when we will overcome this disease. The day is coming when I'm going to be able to tell you we can gather again. The day is coming when I'll be able to tell you, in fact, we will be having the concerts and the street fairs and the parades again. But I want to guarantee you one thing, that when that day comes, that we can restart the vibrant, beautiful life of this city again, the first thing we will do is we will have a ticker tape parade down the Canyon of Heroes for our healthcare workers and our first responders. We will honor those who saved us. The first thing we will do before we think about anything else is we will take a time, as only New York City can do, to throw the biggest, best parade to honor these heroes. And many, many great heroes have gone down that canyon to be appreciated and loved by millions of New Yorkers, but I think this will be the greatest of all the parades, because this one will speak to the rebirth of New York City. This one will speak to a kind of heroism that is intrinsic to who we are as New Yorkers, to our values, to our compassion, to our strength, our resiliency. This parade will mark, this parade will mark the beginning of our Renaissance. But it'll also be, most importantly, a chance to say thank you to so many good and noble people, so many tough, strong people. They're fighting right now, and they have to keep fighting, and we have to keep supporting them and showing them our love and appreciation. But one day, we will be able to start back on the road, and we will honor them as they deserve, and that will be a beautiful and joyous day in this city. Everyone, I want to just say a few words in Spanish, and then I'm going to turn to one of our heroes of this great ventilator effort, Scott Cohen, and he's going to talk about how this amazing effort came together. En la ciudad de Nueva York no esperamos ayuda. Aquí le echamos mano a la obra. Lo estamos demostrando de nuevo en esta crisis. Estamos haciendo nuestras propias batas médicas, máscaras, exámenes de coronavirus y ahora ventiladoras. Pase lo que pase, vamos a encontrar una manera de proteger a nuestra gente y seguir salvando vidas. With that, in the spirit of doing for ourselves and protecting ourselves, a man who had tremendous vision, and I just want to say, what an amazing thing to look at what's happening around the world and say, wow, we need ventilators. How about we create our own? What an amazing spirit, how much creativity he and his colleagues had, but that will to get it done and that tirelessness, not waiting for 1 hour, not resting for 1 hour until the job got done. So my great pleasure to introduce the co-founder of New Lab and the lead for the Emergency Ventilator Response Initiative, Scott Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. Just sort of a few words about
Please.
the journey we've been on. Well, I just really wanted to say that we really wouldn't be here today without the partnership with the city. Really early on, when Marcel and Charles Boyce from Boyce Technologies and Marcel Botha, who's on the end here from 10X Beta, who's been a founding member of New Lab since the very beginning, we all started talking about the resources we had around us and the engineers and roboticists and inventors that were around New Lab, the engineers and experts over at Boyce Technologies, and we all started talking very early on at the impetus that was actually another New Lab member who was watching what was going on in Italy, who was Italian, and asked us, could we help Italy? And we really started thinking about it, and we weren't sure, both Marcel and I were quite skeptical whether we could do something like this. But then when it started coming to New York, we were like, well, we have to lean into it. And so the three of us came together, and then very early on, we reached out to James Padgett at the EDC. We let him know what we were thinking about, and that we really needed to know there was some sort of partnership with the city, because this was a very risky and fluid endeavor. I don't think we ever knew at any given instance whether we were going to get this done in the time frame that we set out to, but we all navigated through it. And I mean, there were really, I'd say, hundreds of people involved in this effort. There were engineers from New Lab and from Boyce. There were engineers that reached out from other communities in Silicon Valley. There were engineers from MIT up in Boston that were shuttling down to New York to help us work on the software for the device. And so I do think this is about the agility of New Yorkers, but it's also about the inventiveness and commitment of Americans coming together, and the type of training that's happening in our engineering schools around this country that I think is really paying off for us. So I'm grateful for the city, and grateful that we had the benefit of having the city invest in New Lab years and years ago, and I don't think any of us knew where we'd be today, but it's an asset.
And I just want to ask, I know our colleagues in the media will ask questions in a second, but to all of you, there is an audacity to saying we're going to make something we never made before, not even close to making before, and to do it on this timeline. And you said at first there was doubt, understandably. What helped you overcome the doubt?
I just think we all really felt this was something that had to be done. And I think there were different moments. I mean, one moment was when we had something that looked like it was working, and all the critical care physicians came down with folks from the EDC to look at where we were and give us kind of some input. And they sat with Marcel and all the engineers and gave feedback. And just seeing what they were going through and seeing how this was a glimmer of light for them gave us a real charge, gave all the engineers a real good boost when they were exhausted to push on. And I also think that, you know, that's what engineers do all the time. That's what Marcel's group at 10X Beta does. We walk up to his studio all the time with a napkin sketch and say, you think we can build this thing? And that's not something that that's not a new thing at New Lab. That's something we do every day. So I think we all felt this was possible. I also really appreciate the fact that in 2010, a group of engineers led by Dr. Slocum at MIT were thinking about building a low-cost ventilator that could address this kind of problem in the developing world. And I don't think they realized that it could have such a service to New Yorkers and to this country at the time. But when we were searching around the internet for like what would be something that could be responsive, we found what they'd worked on in 2010. And a close friend of ours, Saul Griffith on the West Coast, weighed in with us and said, yeah, I think that's the one. We all kind of triangulated on that device, and then we reached out to the folks at MIT, and I think they had started mobilizing 3 or 4 days before, and then it became a round robin of sharing and kind of cooperative competition between lots of engineers, and so they were really amazing, and I think the whenever we hit roadblocks, we'd call other folks at MIT. When they hit roadblocks, they called us. We built some hardware devices for them that they brought back up there. So it was a lot of real kind of competitive cooperation between a lot of really smart people. Yeah.
I love that, and it reminds me of things we've seen in different movies of folks racing against time to come up with some solution, but this is real life. This happened here and now, and the fact that you were so inspired when you heard from the healthcare professionals what they were trying to do and the people they were trying to save, and that moved you to even higher levels of inspiration and action. I mean, that's very, very powerful. And I just have to thank you so deeply for sticking with it, no matter what. And I want to see Marcel or James, if you want to add, you're more than welcome. We appreciate so much.
Yeah, excuse me, thank you. Yeah, I think all of us were sort of, intimidated by the complexity of a full-scale ventilator 6 weeks ago. And then 4 weeks ago, we realized that, listen, put that aside, find a solution. And I think that the beauty of this bridge ventilator is that it replaces a hand that's squeezing an ambu bag or a resuscitator bag. That's an existing process in the clinical care stack. And what we learned in the last 4 weeks is that the hand is a very complex neuroskeletal muscular system trained by a brain. So we try to replace all of that, not just the mechanical function. And that's why this stands head and shoulders above most other bridge devices out there.
Well done. Well done. James, you want to add?
I'll just say it was Scott described it well. It was a process where there were a lot of days of doubt. There were moments where, I would call Mitch, Dr. Katz at the Health and Hospitals and say, how soon do we need these? Do we need these tomorrow? And he said, I have 5 more days. You have 5 more days. And then I would call Scott and say, okay, we have 5 more days to perfect this device. And it was a day in, day out thing. And fortunately, the day never came where Mitch said we need these tomorrow. But it was a constant process where they were working to make the device better and better, to be more functional every day while we were watching the clock. And that was and there were times, I think, when all of us felt like this would never come together, and it's just an inspiration now to see this device here working, to have seen it at hospitals already with doctors in clinical care settings. So it's just a tremendous inspiration to see these folks and the team at EDC. Frankly, it's a team of over 20 people who a month ago didn't know what a PEEP valve was, and today can tell you all about the different components that are necessary to construct a device. And we're just honored to be a part of this team. And I think it's an inspiration, and just as you said, an example of what it's possible for New Yorkers to do when they believe in something. We have an amazing creativity in this city, and it's amazing to watch.
Thank you, and well done, James, you and your whole team at EDC and all our colleagues who did this amazing work. And please thank your teams and all those folks who spent all those long hours and everyone they consulted with. It was an extraordinary group effort. So the fact is, to the point James made, that I was on a number of those calls with Dr. Katz too, and it really was coming down to a matter of days. And we even thought at one point it would come down to a matter of hours whether the next ventilator would be ready. This ventilator, had it been needed on an emergency basis, would have gone into action during the week of April 6th, because it would have been literally a matter of, without it, lives would have been lost. So this effort succeeded on that kind of wartime footing. They were ready at the moment where there would have been no other choice. This machine would have been ready. And that's an amazing testament to the work that folks did, but also, thank God, it did not come to that moment. But I remind everyone, again, not out of the woods by any stretch. We're dealing with, I always say, a ferocious enemy in this disease. So it is something that gives me a little relief on behalf of all New Yorkers to know we will now have that reserve in place to protect us no matter what is thrown at us. With that, let's turn to our colleagues in the media, and please let me know the name and the outlet of each reporter.
Hi all, just a reminder that we have James Patchett, President and CEO of the EDC, Scott Cohen, co-founder of the New Lab, and Marcel Botha, CEO of 10X Beta here in person. And we also have Dr. Katz, of President and CEO of Health and Hospitals, on the phone. So with that, I will start with Matt Chase from Newsday.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering, what have you told the NYPD to do to address the increased rate of speeding motorists? What benchmarks have you established, and are you satisfied that those benchmarks are being met?
Yeah, Matt, it's a good question because obviously, look, I want to start at the beginning of this to all my fellow New Yorkers. Look, I know there's a lot fewer cars on the road. I understand the temptation people have. They think, oh, there's no one here. I can go faster. It's dangerous. You have got to recognize in the middle of this crisis, this coronavirus crisis, we cannot afford another crisis, which is people speeding, getting into crashes, harming other people, harming themselves, or lives being lost. And we've already seen some of that. We cannot have that happen. So the first point is slow down. Doesn't matter if there's not a lot of cars on the road. You've got to protect yourself and others. The second point is the NYPD has been instructed to crack down, as is always the case. And the NYPD has been, I think, over the last 6 years with Vision Zero, extraordinary in their devotion to the concepts of Vision Zero. We still need a lot of enforcement. Now, let's face it, NYPD now has multiple tasks they're trying to undertake simultaneously. And I do want to express not only my appreciation, but my understanding. NYPD is short-staffed because of the number of officers who are out sick, has to deal with everything it normally deals with in fighting crime and helping people. On top of that, we have the new reality of having to enforce social distancing rules and shelter in place on a vast scale. That's a lot to do. So we're not always going to be able to do everything to the level we perfectly want because there's just limited numbers of officers. But definitely have said to the commissioner we need aggressive enforcement related to speeding. We cannot ignore the problem. We got to be present. We got to let people know there will be consequences. And that will continue, and we'll do everything we can. And as more and more officers come back well, we'll be able to expand that further.
Next, we have Aaron from Politico.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. I have a follow-up about the ventilators, and then I have a separate question. On the ventilators, how many are going to be in the strategic reserve, and is it all bridge ventilators that are going to be in the reserve, or are you going to put full-service ventilators in there as well?
So we're going to put a lot of different things in the reserve over time, and I'll in the coming weeks I'll detail what we intend to have and how we're going to go about it. But this purchase of 3,000 of the bridge ventilators, that guarantees us a lot of strength going forward if we ever deal with, again, a rebound, God forbid, a rebound of this disease in the here and now or next year, but also for the future protects us against many other challenges. We definitely want to make sure we have enough full-service ventilators as well going forward. And the other items, I mean, we've all seen things like the N95 masks that have been absolutely crucial. So I think it's going to be a combination of what can we produce here so that we know, and this would be, Aaron, my preference, what we can produce here that we know we can not only have a reserve amount, but a reserve capacity to create a lot more on short notice. And then some things I'm certain that we will have to purchase in quantity to fill our reserve. But my perfect model, the thing I want to drive toward is a physical reserve of equipment and supplies, and even more so, the ability to produce here at a large level.
Okay. And then my other question was...
Aaron, can you hear me? I want to make sure just everyone, just for consistency, just get your questions. Normally in our regular press conferences where there's a different format, I tell people split it up. I just want to always say to folks, basically we're letting people do 2 questions up front. Just get them both up front. It just make the process easier the way we're doing things now.
Yeah, sure. I think I got muted. Anyway, is there anything the city can do to help municipal workers who are struggling to get death certificates that they need to claim the benefits they're entitled to? The head of 2 major unions said this has become a major obstacle for those who have passed away.
Yeah, we got to get that. We have to resolve that. I don't want to see anyone waiting who doesn't need to wait, and unless there's a very specific reason causing the delay. Whatever. We've said this to medical examiner. We said this to health department. Whatever they need in the way of personnel or support. This is such a painful moment for so many families, including our public servants. We don't want people delayed. There's some things we're all dealing with here that are beyond anyone's reach because of the nature of this crisis. But anything that we can fix, anything we can do to lighten the burden, we need to. So on something like that, I want to see that sped up. And we will make sure that happens, and that anything those agencies need to do it, we will make sure they have the personnel to get it done.
Next, we have Ruvain from Hamodia.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. While the state has banned if in most cases banned visitors from hospitals because they don't want overcrowding, there have been reports of from hospitals across the city of neglect and patients not getting lung suction properly, being found with empty oxygen tanks, taking hours and hours to get food or water. Again, some of these are confirmed, some aren't because no one's allowed into the hospitals. Would the city consider what some people are asking for is allowing in some sort of outside monitors who are not on hospitals' payrolls to ensure that there is proper care?
I appreciate this question a lot because we understand, I think what I'm hearing as the core of your question is that, as good as our hospitals are and our healthcare workers are, they're also incredibly busy and stressed right now, dealing with so much. And it is always helpful for a family to be able to advocate for their loved ones, or anybody who's a loved one in their life being able to advocate for them and understand that that's been thrown off by this dynamic. Let me speak to what we can do to work on that, but I first want Dr. Katz to jump in and talk about how at our public hospitals, how you are addressing that challenge, understanding that we're trying to save lives every single hour of every single day, and that comes first. But I know, Mitch, you are very sensitive to the realities of the people in someone's life who matter to them and the important role they play in helping and protecting someone. How are you balancing that at health and hospitals?
Sir, it's such a difficult question. In regular times, I advise people never go to the hospital without having a family member with you. I just think that things are complicated at hospitals and you should always have someone to advocate for you, especially when you're sick. But these are such extraordinary times. The major reason that we haven't been allowing visitors, and it's not just us, it's all of the hospitals, isn't crowds. It's that we're trying to prevent transmission of the disease. We want people to shelter in place. We don't want them to be in a hospital where there are a lot of people who have COVID and could transmit COVID to them. We don't want to use extra protective equipment because we have to maintain enough protective equipment for our healthcare workers. And we don't want to introduce other people who themselves could be COVID positive to the hospital. So it has been an extremely, extremely difficult. We have been trying as much as possible. We have volunteers with iPads who are connecting people to their families, which I think is a beautiful thing. But it's been very challenging to weigh the risks of creating more infection in New York by allowing more people into a very high COVID place and trying to also be thoughtful about people's families.
So thank you very, very much, Mitch. That really paints the picture and the challenge very powerfully. I think to the question of having some kind of monitors in hospital, I think what I'd say right now is we better make sure, and this is something we will work on with all the hospitals, that family members who are trying to get information, who are trying to advocate, even if they can't be there in person, that there's a way to do that the right way and to support them and to hear them, while again recognizing what Mitch just said, that is not the same thing as allowing people to have the access they used to have, because we have to protect everybody. But I don't want us to miss that advocacy still has a place. So we will work together with the hospitals to figure out how we can do that for this circumstance in a better, clearer way. And I'll come back with an update on that.
Next, we have Alex from Chalkbeat.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. How are you?
Hey, Alex. How you doing?
Good. I wanted to ask a question about school grading policies. Some other large school districts have moved to kind of no harm policies, acknowledging that students are going to have kind of like differential access to online learning. And I'm wondering why that hasn't happened in New York City, or if that's something that you're considering.
Yeah, Alex, it's a great question. We are considering a lot of things because we're in the great unknown, and at the time we closed the schools, it was quite clear there were so many questions to answer, and that every school system in the country dealing with this has had the challenge, but we're having it in a way that's beyond any other school system just because of the size and the complexity, the diversity. So we've got to figure it out. The thing we're particularly focused on is helping our seniors who can graduate to graduate and go on to what's next in their life. And that's been a singular focus, obviously with every week trying to strengthen the online learning. But we got to figure out within that what we're doing about grading. There's, some time, obviously, to figure that out before the end of the school year, but not a lot of time. So that's something the chancellor, I know, is trying to determine with his team. We'll come back and say more on that soon. I think I appreciate that point you make about the sort of no harm approach, and we're certainly looking at that. I think right now the first focus, again, is to help the seniors who can graduate, maximize the online learning and getting those devices in the hands of kids who don't have them yet in the next few days, and getting more of a rhythm going with the online learning. And then we'll definitely make sense of the grading issue and talk about it publicly.
Next, we have Shant from the Daily News.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The fact the city is resorting to creating its own stockpile feels like a sort of condemnation of the federal response to the outbreak, since it's the feds who are supposed to maintain a robust national stockpile in the first place. I was wondering if you can put the city's strategic stockpile in the context of the nationwide pictures on supplies, and do you think other cities should emulate what New York City is doing?
Yeah, Shant, it is a very, you said a mouthful there. It is a very sobering, telling moment when I have to sit here before you and say that New York City needs its own strategic reserve because we can't depend on the federal government at this point. It's sobering as all hell. I mean, it's just not something I'm happy to tell you, but it is really, really clear. This is a city that, really led this nation over generations in building up the concept of a federal government that would be there to protect all Americans. And obviously no one did it more than New York's own Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But that idea has atrophied in so many ways. And now we have a New Yorker in the White House who unfortunately is putting an exclamation point on the idea that the federal government is no longer reliable when it comes to protecting everyday Americans. And no place is bearing the brunt of that neglect more than New York City. It's just unacceptable. So, the reality, the famous phrase, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I mean, we've now gotten the point. Since January 24th, we've been asking for a sufficient supply of testing, and we haven't had one day where we had it. What else do we have to know to understand that going forward, we have to protect ourselves? And so we will build what we can build here. Again, that's my first preference, to have the production be right here and to make sure that we know how to turn it on rapidly for anything that we think we might need that's viable to produce here. And then on top of that, to buy what we have to buy. But we've got to have our own reserve to protect ourselves. I would hate in the future if New Yorkers faced a crisis and turned to the federal government and they said, sorry, we're all out. And then New Yorkers suffered, New Yorkers died because of it. We cannot take that risk. So we have to do it ourselves. And I'll just preview that when the Q&A is over, we're going to have Scott just show us a little more about how this thing works. So that'll be our finale, to give people a sense of how this amazing machine actually works, homegrown in New York City. Go ahead.
Next, we have Yoav from the city.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask about, the state is rescinding some of its orders for equipment, basically stuff that might no longer be needed, and is now giving ventilators to other states. Is the city going to similarly try to perhaps cancel? I know we need a lot more PPEs, but on ventilators, are you going to cancel any of those contracts, or will those perhaps go into the reserve? As far as the field,
go ahead.
As far as the field hospitals, do you still plan to build all the ones that you've announced, or might you scale those back as well?
Yeah, so the quick answer is on the purchasing. Again, we do need to ensure that we'll have enough full service ventilators for the future. So a number have come in. Some of those are going to be returned, obviously, when the crisis really is over and we're far from out of the woods. When everything's sort of toted up and we know which ventilators are going to remain in New York City at the end of this process, we do need to make sure we have a reserve beyond that. And we will have that as part of our strategic reserve. Obviously, the bridge ventilators as well, the 3,000. But yeah, you said it on the PPEs, we are way far from out of the woods. We don't have enough strategic gowns to get to the end of the week. So we're going to have a really substantial supply to protect us in the future. On the field hospitals, yeah, the basic reality now is the ones that are up and running will continue for the foreseeable future. The ones that are not yet built out, some may be built out and be ready in reserve and or to be turned into isolation and quarantine centers. Remember, in most of these cases, the same building, whether it's a hotel or some other kind of building that could have been used for a field hospital, can be converted to an isolation and quarantine center. We're going to need a lot of those rooms, a lot of those beds, when we go into the next phase of really pushing back the disease, and then lots of testing, lots of temperature checks, lots of people who, if anyone is positive or symptomatic, isolating them, quarantining them, helping them get through, testing more before people come back. We're going to need a lot of space for that. So those facilities will have more than one purpose for sure.
Next, we have Marcia from CBS.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. How are you doing today?
Good, Marcia. How are you?
I'm okay. I have two questions for you today. First of all, there are several southern states, including Georgia, that are thinking of reopening their states. I wonder if that concerns you, and if it concerns you that people from those states might come to New York City and spread more disease. Would you consider barring those people from coming into New York in order to protect New York City residents? And my second question has to do with the fact that the governor is meeting with President Trump today. And I wonder if you were in that room, what you would be saying to the president today.
So, Marcia, on the first point, I am really concerned. I don't begrudge any state or any city that has really carefully looked at their healthcare situation, seen a lot of improvement. They've gotten to that phase where there's only a few cases and they can trace them and contain them and keep the outbreak from reasserting. Any state or any city that is certain that that's what they've got, God bless them. I understand why they would then open up. But if they're wrong about that, if they're not careful about that, then it could threaten all of their residents and then everybody else. And that becomes a problem for New York City. That becomes a problem for all of the United States of America. So I'm definitely concerned that, you've heard the rhetoric from the president, liberate Michigan, liberate Virginia. That's dangerous in my view because it pushes people to move whether they have the facts or not. And I think the facts are what matter here. If you can prove that the disease is really under control, then start opening up more. But if you can't prove it, don't make a false move. Don't take your foot off the gas. So in terms of the threat to New York City, that's a real threat. I want to be careful about the notion, and this is something we would work on the state with. I would be very careful about the notion of being negative to any individual from a state. People tried that towards New Yorkers. I didn't think that was fair. So I'd be very careful about that. I think the more essential point is to push for federal leadership to work with the states to make sure they reopen carefully, slowly, and if they see anything wrong, that they quickly put some of those restrictions back on to protect all of us. We get one chance, Marcia, to restart our economy and restart our lives the right way. And if people jump the gun, we're going to pay for it. We're all going to pay for it. If I was in the room today with the president, I would say, Mr. President, there's only been two things you needed to do this whole time. One, get the testing to New York City and all the places in America that needed it. And two, help us through this horrible challenge by providing us the aid we need to get back on our feet. The cities and states that have borne the brunt, that are going through this healthcare crisis, this economic crisis, and aren't going to be able to pay the bills, aren't going to be able to provide basic services, help us as only the federal government could do. Well, Marcia, he's got two things he really, really needed to do. The first one, he's blown completely. The second one, he's been silent on. And right now, we're waiting for a word from Washington about whether that state or local aid is going to be in the current package. It's not looking good right now. The president must speak and tell the Senate they have to do it. They have to either do it right now or do it very soon, or else you're going to see cities and states start to go bankrupt, literally, and not be able to provide what our people need, and then you won't have a recovery.
Next is Roger from 1010 Wins.
Hi, good morning, Mayor. I wanted to ask you what you thought about the president's immigration announcement and what you think the appropriate immigration policy should be during a pandemic. Should there be cuts in immigration if it threats public health?
Roger, I want to say what I saw was bluntly and very sadly just a brazen political move by the president to introduce the question of immigration in the middle of this when he hasn't done those two things I just mentioned. He hasn't gotten us the testing. He's not getting us the stimulus funding. He's not doing his job. So he's going to his all-time favorite distraction, immigration, which he uses as a campaign weapon all the time. Remember when, the caravans were all going to be coming to our towns and taking over our towns from Mexico and Guatemala? Of course, nothing like that ever happened. This is his go-to when he's in trouble. So that's what I think is motivating it. To the bigger issue, I respect any kind of plan that is trying to protect us all while we deal with the pandemic. It's an exceptional situation. An honest plan to protect us while we deal with this and get back on our feet and then resume our traditions in this country of being a welcoming, open country, that's one thing. I don't think that's what he's talking about. I think he's talking about a political ploy, honestly.
Next is Julia from the Post.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and everyone else on the call. A question for you, Mr. Mayor, and a question for James Patchett, who I believe you said is on the call. First for you, I'm wondering if you regret not having this bridge ventilator program going weeks earlier when we were in, more dire need of the machines. And I'm wondering if they were available on April 6th, why didn't we hear of it then? And then for James Patchett, I was looking for an update on the homegrown testing. Have any of the contracts with the universities and the private companies been signed? And if so, can you make that announcement now?
So, Julia, I'll turn to James in a moment. I think you know our ground rule. When we have something to announce, we announce it. James will offer whatever he wants to now, but I will remind you that, we've said those homegrown test kits will be coming in the beginning of May, and that we're going to announce the different organizations that are part of it, the companies, the universities, anyone who is part of putting that together, like this amazing coalition to put together the ventilators, will announce it publicly. But when we are ready and when everyone has been notified and they're ready, that's when we make an announcement. But to the question of the bridge ventilators, again, and we're going to do the demonstration in a couple of minutes now because I know time is running short. These were ready to go into action the week of April 6th. The situation changed radically and for the better right around April 5th, April 6th, including that we got some shipments of the full service ventilators in at the last moment that we had not been able to depend on. So we didn't need to put them into service. But if they had been needed, they would have gone immediately into service, even though they were partway through the process with the FDA. And I want Dr. Katz to explain this because I think it's hard for a non-medical person and someone who hasn't been here in this kind of wartime headquarters dynamic to understand just how close it got. Dr. Katz is the one that said to me, look, if we get to the point where it's about saving a life, then the rules, the medical ethics are actually different vis-a-vis something like an FDA approval if it's the only way to save a life. Dr. Katz, could you explain that?
You have it exactly right, sir. And during those days, I remember every night right before going to sleep, I would be checking to make sure there were enough ventilators at every one of our 11 hospitals. And it would be the first thing I would do in the morning. Everything was about making sure that we wouldn't run out of ventilators. In general, we like for all of our machines to be approved by the FDA. We like them to have been gone through clinical practice. And so when it turned out, because you were able to secure those ventilators for us right when we were running out, we did not run out that week of April 5th. But had we run out, we would not have needed the FDA approval. We would have not needed having done the research studies to prove that it works. physicians can always use a device to save a life. And so if there were no ventilators to use, and the choice was between allowing a patient to die and placing them on a ventilator that had not yet received FDA approval or been proven in clinical studies to work, everyone would favor using the ventilator device. And so that's why I was tremendously relieved when I knew these devices could be put into service.
Thank you, Mitch. And I'll add the last point before turning to James quickly that no, I want you to understand, Julia, the notion in the beginning that we would not have a supply chain that functioned. In the beginning of March, as this was going on, we thought our supply chain was holding. We also thought federal aid would be consistent. And it was really as we got into the third week in March that it became abundantly clear that something was getting worse and worse and something was going wrong. And had there been a ready supply chain and or a federal effort to either use existing stockpiles or move ventilators around the country, which is something they could have done at any point, and they never did. I kept saying mobilize the military, create a national supply chain that was federally run, use the Defense Production Act properly. None of that happened. All of that could have given us the security that we didn't need to even think about something like doing a homegrown model. But at a point, it became clear, towards, again, the third week of March, that everything had gone haywire, that we couldn't depend on any of the things we normally depended on. And that's where, from my point of view, is like, if we have to create something ourselves, whether we know how to make it or not, we got to do something. And these folks were amazing in pulling something together. And the fact is they did it so that, and we didn't know exactly how the pieces would align, but had it been needed, it was going to be pressed into service, and this ventilator would have saved lives. James, you want to add?
Sure. I'll just say on your second question, we've made tremendous progress. We've had a number of our partners sign contracts with us, and we are well on our pathway to being able to meet the overall test kit obligations that the mayor has set out for us to acquire for the city.
More to come on that soon. Go ahead.
We'll take two more questions today. Next, we have Andrew from NBC.
Mayor, good morning. How are you?
Good, Andrew. How you doing?
Good, thanks. So yesterday you announced the cancellation of all the June events, including Pride, which is June 28th. Just 6 days after that is the 4th of July. I wondered, have you already begun discussions about whether there can be any kind of fireworks watching in New York City? And can you envision that?
We have not begun those discussions, certainly not at my level. I'm sure our team has been talking to our colleagues at Macy's and everyone else who would have to coordinate an endeavor that size. Hard to see it today, but that is obviously one of the most important days of the year, and boy, does it speak volumes to our values and what we're feeling as a country right now. So that one, we have some time to sort out. Hard to see right now, but Andrew, we're going to be looking at our indicators every single day to see where we're going. And so, I'm going to reserve judgment on that for a little bit while we see what the healthcare facts tell us, and just recognize that July 4th is a day like no other, and want to be really thoughtful about that.
Last question for today, Henry from Bloomberg.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. I hope you're doing well. I've got two questions. They're related. The first is, how is this bridge ventilator different from a normal ventilator? My second question is, a lot of the recent research and reporting on this disease suggests that ventilators are not necessarily the most effective treatment of this form of respiratory distress, that really respiratory therapy, moving patients in bed, using oxygen, may be better techniques for treating this particular new disease than going to a ventilator and intubating a patient.
Okay, so what we'll do is this. I'm going to turn to Dr. Katz to answer your medical question on one, what a bridge ventilator allows, and two, on whether there are alternatives that are being considered. I can say from being in the middle of this battle, I certainly think our healthcare professionals across the board believed, especially dealing with the scale of this problem, that it was absolutely necessary to have ventilators available in quantity to keep up with the demand and keep people alive, and they have saved many a life because they had the ventilators. But Dr. Katz will answer your two questions, and then we'll have Scott just take a moment as we conclude to show us a little more of how this works so everyone can see it. And Scott, you can just describe first in the microphone what you're going to show people, and then you can do that. But let's have Mitch Katz first answer the questions.
Thank you, sir. I'll start with Henry's second part. So Henry is correct that as we've learned more and more about this illness, we know that it's best to try to avoid intubation. It's best to use other methods like giving people oxygen, doing aggressive respiratory therapy, using BPAP and BiPAP and other methods of trying to keep people off the ventilators, in part because once people need ventilators, they don't do very well in general. That being said, no one disagrees that if somebody cannot be oxygenated through other methods, they should be on a ventilator, and there is no choice. So we do everything we can to try to keep people off ventilators, but when they need a ventilator, no choice. And that has not changed anywhere in this medical picture. In terms, Henry, of how to explain it, and I think when you see it, it will help. Most ventilators work by pushing oxygen through a tube into the tube that people have placed in their mouth and then down into their lungs. So you're essentially, the machine is blowing out, a typical ventilator is blowing out air that goes directly into the tube. This ventilator is based on a robotic squeeze of what is known as an ambu bag. When we ventilate patients, if they only need to be ventilated for short periods of time, we've always used what I call an ambu bag. It's not a ventilator. Basically, you squeeze it and it pushes in the oxygen. And we've used this for generations. It's a very safe and well-known tool. The problem is somebody has to squeeze it. You need a live person to do that, and you need them to do it at a particular rhythm so that the inspiratory phase and the expiratory phase is the right length of time, the pressure is the right amount of pressure. So first, it would take a real human being 24 hours a day to do it. And second, they wouldn't necessarily always get it right the way a robot can. And so basically, the way I look at these vents is it's a robotic ambu bag presser. It presses the ambu bag the way a human might, but it does it with much greater scientific precision. It doesn't require a human. And the developers of this have added some amazing bells and whistles, literally bells and whistles, that would tell us if the person were not getting the proper amount of oxygen through the ventilator.
I think that's perfect. That's great, Mitch. And I think Mitch just gave us the narration we needed. Unless there's anything you want to add, Scott, feel free and then show us.
Okay, yeah. The only thing I really wanted to add was that I think what the bells and whistles that Dr. Katz is talking about, we have on here primarily because we had physicians, clinicians working with us from the very beginning, Dr. Kwan and Dr. Slocum Jr., who were working with Marcel and the engineers, and we were getting constant feedback about what physicians would want on a device like this. So they had the visibility, kind of a control panel to understand how the device was interacting with the patient.
Excellent. Yeah. Please.
Okay. It's on? It's good. Okay, it's on. It's good. So you switch it on. You set your tidal volume, your respiration rate, and your inspiration expiration ratio, and then you hit run. And then once that is going, it's going to just be like watching paint dry. It's going to go for hours and days. The bags themselves last for about 3 days. So we replace the ambu bag every 3 days. We have an inline pressure sensor that measures the respiratory or the airway pressure. So that's one of the safety feedback loops, so that you get all of that displayed on the interface on the front. If there's any of the thresholds for safety that are surpassed, the device will show one of the relevant alarms, run airway pressure. If it fails to work, or if there's something that obstructs it, it will have a mechanical failure alarm that you cannot silence. And so it's a minimum viable product around replacing a human hand, and it's able to do that with a much higher rate of precision than an untrained hand, for instance.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to everyone. Really an amazing achievement. And as we wrap up, just to say, this is New York City ingenuity at its best. This is a homegrown solution to an international problem. And it really, really inspires me. As I said, a day's coming when we're going to really praise and appreciate and love and celebrate all the heroes of this fight, starting with our healthcare workers and our first responders. But I'm going to make sure we also have a moment in that parade where we get to celebrate the folks who created these ventilators and the folks who built those face shields and the surgical gowns and all the things to protect our healthcare workers and our first responders, because it's just been an amazing effort by so many New Yorkers to help each other, to be there for each other, and that is something that one day we will celebrate like we have never celebrated before. I think the ventilator agrees with me. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. God bless you all.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Good to be with you. Let me introduce the people who are with us today. From my right, Gareth Rhodes, who works with me in state government and who has been involved in this special effort from day one. To my immediate right, Dr. Jim Malatras, technically a doctor, but not like a medical doctor, but still a doctor. To my left, Governor Kathy Hochul, my partner in state government, who has been a true treasure to the people of the state of New York. And to Kathy Hochul's left, Dr. Candace Johnson from Roswell Park Cancer Institute, which is where we are today in Buffalo. Roswell Park is one of the leading cancer institutes in the United States and a real jewel for the state of New York, and I thank her very much for their hospitality today. Let me give you some of the facts today. One of the points we want to make today is we're in Western New York, Buffalo. We've been talking a lot about New York City and the situation in New York City and Long Island and Westchester and Rockland, the suburbs of New York City. But just as we're seeing across the country, this virus presents a slightly different problem in different parts of the country. It also presents a different problem in different parts of the state. Overall, the total hospitalizations are basically flat from where they were yesterday. And as you see, the overall curve is on the way down, and that is good news, certainly. The net change in hospitalizations is down, not as down as much as we would like. Change in intubations is down, and that's always good news, because intubations means the person is on a ventilator. 80% of the time when people are on a ventilator, they don't come off the ventilator in a successful way. The number of new people in the state who walked in the door yesterday or were diagnosed with COVID is 1,300. That is down, and that's good news, relative to really bad news, which is what was happening up until then, right? We have to remember our calculus of good, our definition of good has changed here. Good is now not terrible, but on an absolute scale, 1,300 people walk in the door with COVID on a single day in the state of New York. That would not be good news in any other context besides the context we're living in. This is Erie County. Buffalo is in Erie County, New York. And you see the numbers. We had a dramatic increase in Erie County, and then basically a leveling flat little uptick yesterday. Number of total hospitalizations in Erie, 3-day average. Again, basically flat. These numbers, I would not take any of these 1-day numbers, even 3-day numbers, as absolute. This is a new reporting mechanism that just was put in place. So from a statistical point of view, I don't know exactly what the margin of error is, with all due respect to the great statisticians doing this. We've been watching the spread all across the state, because this is like stamping out a brush fire. You need to run to where the fire is and put it out there. So we were watching for a spread of the fire from downstate New York towards upstate. Whenever we see a small fire starting, we jump on it right away, testing, isolation, etc. But that's remained fairly constant, and that's also good news. But the point that different regions of the country have different quote-unquote curves. The virus does not hit at the same time at the same rate. So you hear about different states in the country, and when they're going to hit their apex, when they're going to hit their top, and when they're going to come down. It's different all across the country. It's also different across the state. We've been talking about states like they're uniform, homogeneous entities. Some are more homogeneous than others. When I was in the federal government, I worked in every state. So you have a whole different variety of states. This state, we have very different regions within New York. When you say New York, people think New York City. one of the densest places on the globe. You also have upstate New York, where in some counties you have more cows than people. People don't think of New York that way. So as you see variety across the country, we have variety across the state of New York. And you have to watch each one of those individual curves, and when does that region hit a high point, and where is that? Because depending on that region's curve is how you have to calculate your strategy. And you're looking at those curves. How long is the ascent up the mountain? And then how long are we on that plateau? And then how long is the descent from the plateau? Western New York, I believe we're on the plateau. All right, now the question is, how long are we on that plateau? And is it a plateau, or might it still ascend? Downstate New York, it appears that we're on the descent. And the question then becomes, in downstate New York, well, how quickly do we descend? The worst news, and the really ugliest part of my job these days, is telling New Yorkers this news. In Erie County, we lost 7 hospital deaths yesterday for a total of 125. In the state, we lost 481 people. 452 in hospitals, 29 in nursing homes. Again, nursing homes are a central focus and priority for all of us going through that. Where are we today? We're operating with 2 rules. First rule is do no harm. Second rule is start to plan the reopening. Planning the reopening is just that, plan the reopening. Understand it, calculate it, calibrate it. Nobody's ever done it before. How do you do it? When do you do it? But first rule, do no harm. We paid a tremendous price to get where we are today and make the progress that we have made today. We paid a tremendous price to control this beast. We closed down everything. People have worked tirelessly in the healthcare system and the first responders and the essential workers. You showed you can control the beast. Do no harm. Don't go backwards. That's the first point, and then plan the reopening. On the do no harm, you take a place like Erie County, any region in the country or in a state that is still on the ascent or on the plateau, beware of a hotspot, beware of an increased need. In this state, what we've said is any need anywhere in the state, the rest of the state will surge capacity and equipment and energy to help that part of the state. So when downstate New York needed help, upstate New York was there. If upstate New York needs help, or western New York needs help, or central New York or the North Country needs help, the rest of the state will be there. And you have my word on that. In these crises, pressure brings out the best and the worst in people. I believe that. Individually, you get to really see how a person's responds at a time of crisis. You get a little snapshot of their character and of their foundation. It's also true of the collective. It's also true of society. And when I say we have to move to help Western New York, yeah, there will be some places in the state where you hear a voice that says, no, we have to worry about ourselves. We have to take care of us, and they're on their own the way we're on our own. Not in New York. That's not how we operate. Nobody's on their own. We are one state. We are one family. We are one community, and we're there to help one another. So whatever Erie County needs, whatever Western New York needs, you have my word that the rest of the state will be responsive. Hopefully we're on this plateau, and on the other side of the plateau is a descent, so we can manage it. But if it's not a descent and it's an ascent anywhere in the state, the rest of the state will be there. And part of it is testing. I know it's a granular topic, but it's important. We're also going to have a regional calibration that we're going to make on hospitals. You have many hospitals that are very quiet. Some hospitals are actually laying off people, believe it or not, in the middle of this because they have no patients. We are going to, we artificially stopped the number of patients going into a hospital because we ended what's called elective surgery, elective treatment. And therefore, people can't go into the hospital for an elective procedure. In those parts of the state and in those hospitals where the hospitals are laying off people because they're so quiet and they have that capacity, and capacity for the virus is not an issue, we're going to allow elective outpatient treatment, which means the number of beds remain available because the number of people using those beds is still relatively minimal. And we're going to allow it in those hospitals and counties in the state that do not have a COVID issue or we couldn't need their beds in case of a surge. This will not include Westchester, Rockland, New York City hospitals, et cetera, because we have a real COVID problem there. It won't include Erie County or Albany County or Dutchess and several other counties where we still need to protect those hospital beds in case we need them for COVID. On testing, people need to understand this issue because it's going to be determinative and it's complicated and it's been somewhat politicized. And now you hear different arguments about testing. Here are the simple facts on testing. And again, testing is something that no one would have expected as an issue, right? Testing we do in this country, and nobody really noticed. We have a whole system. It's a private sector system. And when you went to the hospital and the doctor said you have to have your child checked for this, so you have to be checked for this, you go to a lab, you have your blood tested. That was the testing system. No one ever imagined this testing system was going to become hyper relevant to survival and would need a capacity of 20, 30, 40, 50 times what the system was doing. So this came out of the blue in many ways. And it's one of the lessons we will learn. But for us, it came out of the blue. How does it work? You have national companies that are private manufacturers of laboratory equipment, and their piece of equipment can operate their test kits, okay? And there are a number of these private sector companies. And they make a machine, they sell that machine to labs, a network of labs all across the nation. We have about 211 labs in New York State. They buy these machines from these national companies, and they then have that machine. Sometimes they buy a number of machines from different manufacturers, and now they have a number of different machines. Some have higher output, some have lower output. But each one requires that you go back to that manufacturer to get a test kit and reagent that works for that manufacturer's machine, okay? So it gets very complicated quickly. There are different, what they call reagents, chemicals, that you need for each manufacturer's test kit and each manufacturer's machine. And the big labs will have bought a number of different machines from a number of different manufacturers, okay? So these are some of the big manufacturers, not all of them. You hear about Abbott, which has a new fast test. And these companies are all working to come up with these tests now, and who's faster and who's quicker, 1 hour test, 20-minute test, 15-minute test, 5-minute test. But every one of those manufacturers, you need to have their test kit and their reagents to operate on their machine. And you have some labs that have 5 or 6 different manufacturers' machines. When you go to the manufacturers and you say, I need you to increase capacity, many of the manufacturers are saying, I can't get enough reagents. I can't get enough swabs, these cotton swabs. I can't get enough vials. I just don't have enough material for my own test kits. That's the determiner of testing capacity, okay? And you're asking a system that, let's say normally did 1,000 tests. You're asking a system that did 1,000 tests, by the way, I need 50,000 tests. So they didn't anticipate this volume. And some of these manufacturers will say, look, I have a supply chain that is an international supply chain. I get my chemicals from China. I get my chemicals from here. So that ability to ramp up is what we're all struggling with. And every state is in charge of administering testing because the 200 labs in New York State are regulated by New York State. I regulate the 200 labs. It's only appropriate that the state should be in charge of actual testing in the state. I agree with the federal government's position on that. I have 200 labs. I should come up with a system that says how many tests in Buffalo, how many tests in Albany, how many tests in Manhattan, how many tests in Long Island. That's my business. I should be held responsible. I should be held responsible for making sure those 200 labs actually deploy across the state in a smart way. Hold me responsible. Where it gets hard is when the labs that I regulate say the manufacturers are the problem. And then I call the manufacturers, and the manufacturers say, I can't do it because it's an international problem. That's where we are now. Last night I get home. I have my 3 daughters with me now, which is a joy 99.9% of the time. We're sitting there, we're watching the news. Governor Larry Hogan comes on the news. Great guy, governor of Maryland, Republican, chairman of the NGA, National Governors Association, and vice chairman, so I work with the governor. And Governor Hogan says, I bought 500 test kits from South Korea. And there's a picture of Governor Hogan at the airport, South Korea airliner, and Governor Hogan says, I got 500 test kits from South Korea. And my daughter turns to me and looks at me and says, wow, that was really smart. And she just looks at me, doesn't say anything else. She didn't have to. I felt an immediate wave of guilt descend upon me. One of my other daughters, who was a little more pointed in life, a little more literal, said, why didn't you think of that, Dad? Why didn't you think of buying test kits from South Korea? So now I was really just feeling de minimis as a governor. Larry Hogan is a better governor. Why didn't I think of buying test kits from South Korea? Why didn't I think of buying test kits from Korea? Why didn't from China? It's not what states normally are responsible for. God bless Larry Hogan. He really thought outside the box and was very creative. But that piece is where the federal government can help us. Take that national manufacturer and that supply chain for the national manufacturers and let the federal government figure out South Korea and China and international supply issues. Rather than have 50 states now figure out how to go be like Governor Hogan and figure out how to buy tests in South Korea. That's where the federal government should help. And that's the intelligent distribution of responsibility on testing. So the federal government's right. The states should take the lead. Yes. Partnership, federal government, you have to help us with this national manufacturer and the supply list. After you do the testing, states have a second big task, put together an army of tracers who then trace each person who tested positive, who did they contact, and then isolate those people who you contact. Also, talking about reopening, we're going to make reopening decisions on a regional basis, based on that region's facts and circumstances about the COVID virus. In other words, just like some states will reopen before other states because they have a different circumstance when it comes to COVID and their status with COVID, it's also true across the state. North Country has a totally different situation than New York City. Central New York has a different situation. We operate as one state, but we also have to understand variations, and you do want to get this economy open as soon as possible. And if a situation is radically different in one part of the state than another part of the state, take that into consideration. And that's what we're going to be doing. So the same logic that applies to the country applies to some states, this state, where you have those varieties across the state. And we need to take that into consideration. So the way we've been working on the economy in general across the state, where we recognized there's one state, yes, but there are regional economies within the state, and we've been working with each individual regional economy. We'll do the same thing on this phase. Let's talk about reopening economies in that regional context and coordinate it regionally. And that's what we're going to be doing. And again, I've said this statewide, but I want all our regional partners to hear us. Let's not talk about just reopening. Let's not have gone all through this and all we're going to do is go back to where we were. How do you use this as an opportunity to learn the lessons and to build back better? That's what we have to do. For Western New York, we have my partner, Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, who, as everybody knows, is from Buffalo. We're going to ask her to take charge of the Western New York, monitor the public health issues, make sure if there's a problem in terms of public health, we're marshaling all the resources from across the state to help Western New York, and also to start to work on the reimagining and the reopening plan for Western New York. We're also going to ask Bob Duffy, who worked with me in the state, to volunteer to be a special advisor to coordinate public health and reopening in the Finger Lakes, the Rochester area. Last point, we've gotten through difficult situations before. Western New York, we went through 7 feet of snow a couple of years ago. That was fun. We learned from that. The state, we went through 9/11, which was a crushing experience, but we learned from that, and we're different and we're better. We went through Superstorm Sandy, and we are the better for that. And we're going to be the better for this. I believe that. It's the hard times in life that actually make you better and make you who you are, if you're intelligent enough to learn from them and to get the message from them. And that's what we have to do here. We have to do it individually. We have to do it collectively. What did we learn about ourselves, about the world, about the country from this period that we're in? And you get knocked on your rear end in life. Yeah, that happens. You get knocked on your rear end. It's going to happen. The question is, do you get up? And if you get up, what type of person are you? And did you learn from getting knocked on your rear end? Sometimes you get knocked on your rear end and you have nothing to blame. Things happen in life. Health issues happen. Bankruptcies happen. Things happen. You get knocked on your rear end. Okay. Get up. Get up. Have the strength to get up. Have the wisdom to learn from the experience and be a better person for it. Michael Jordan documentary is on TV. I'm a big Michael Jordan fan. He doesn't make the varsity team. Michael Jordan. Bad coach, maybe. But he got knocked on his rear end. He was disappointed. What'd he do? He worked harder, practiced more. Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan wasn't just born. God didn't say, here he is. He made himself the great player that he is. And New York, we make ourselves. This nation, we make ourselves. World War I, World War II, the Great Depression. Some of the most tragic situations actually forged the character and the resolve of this nation. New York State, the same thing. And we have to be smart enough to do the same thing here. And we will, because we're New York, tough, but not just tough. It's easy to be tough. It's hard to be smart and disciplined and unified and loving. That's what's harder than being tough. But we're all of the above. That's why we're special. Let's take a few questions. I have to go down to Washington, and everything is a little tight from a scheduling point of view today. Sir?
On that White House visit, what do you see the focus being? Will it be a discussion about reopening with the president? What will the focus of that visit be?
Testing. And what does testing mean, and how do we do it, and how can the federal government work in partnership with the states? Just basically, because this is all new. And look, it's a situation that is very difficult. And it is a situation where, however you do it, it's going to be a blame game afterwards. I heard the president in his briefing the other day. He's right. This is one of those thankless tasks. Trust me. It is one of those tasks where when you get to the end of it, everybody's going to be able to say, you didn't do enough. You didn't do enough. You didn't do enough. So I get the instinct to distance yourself from it, right? But it is a situation where you need everybody to work together, and you need to understand quickly who's in a better position to do what. From my point of view, I think the federal government has to take that national manufacturer supply chain issue. God bless Governor Hogan, but you shouldn't expect all these governors to go run around and do an international supply chain while they're trying to put together their testing protocol in their state, coordinating their labs, how many tests in Buffalo, how many tests in Albany. Then I have to put together an army of tracers. That's thousands of people. It's never been done before. I'll take all of that. Just don't give me guilt and make me look bad to my family and my state when Governor Hogan goes to South Korea and buys all the test kits.
In regards to reopening the state, that seems to be tethered to testing until yesterday. Merely symptomatic folks couldn't get a prescription to get a test in Western New York. What can the state do in the short term? Understanding you need federal government's help, but what can the state do in the short run to ramp up testing here? Because this is an area that's lagged behind.
Yeah, we are testing as a state, just so you know. We're testing more than any state in the United States, a multiple of other states, more testing per capita than any country on the globe. That's what we're doing in New York. So we are doing more faster than anyone else. I get the New York attitude. I don't care. That's not enough. I get it. We have to do better. We have to do more. And we need more tests. And that's what we are talking about here. The testing will educate you as you're making your transition to reopening, right? How do you get across the swamp? Stone to stone across the morass. Stone to stone across the morass. One step at a time, and make sure you're on firm footing. And then you look for the next stone, then you look for the next stone, then you look for the next stone. The testing tells you where the stones are. And the testing tells you when to pause. And that's why you need the testing. You need more testing in Western New York, yes. You need more in Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, North Country, Southern Tier, and New York City and Long Island. We need more all across the board. That's why I'm going to Washington. Mr. McCarthy?
Governor, when you head down to the White House today, I think it's been fair to say that you've had to walk a fine line in your dealings with him. There's criticism that you have, and there's praise that you have for him. So how's this going to continue when you meet with him today? How are you going to handle this?
Bob, life is a fine line. Life is a fine line. Being in government is a fine line. Everything is a fine line. I'll tell you how I negotiate the fine line. You tell the truth. Just tell the truth. And I said to the president from day one. And by the way, he's done the same vis-a-vis me. He has no problem telling me when he disagrees, and he tells me when he agrees. I have no problem telling him when I disagree and when I agree. So fine line, and you can try to figure it out. Or you know what? Heck with it. Just tell the truth, and whatever it is, it is.
How do you think it works today when you talk to him today?
You know, I think there's been a lot of discussion about testing, but I don't know that people have really, I think in many ways we're talking past each other. I understand the federal government's point that it's up to the states, and I believe it is largely up to the states. But then even the federal government will stand there and do a whole presentation on what they're doing on testing. So then it's not really up to the states if the FEMA people get up there and an admiral gets up there and talks about what they're doing on testing. All right, so then let's just coordinate who does what. What do the states do? What does the federal government do? What do you do and what do I do? I'll do whatever I'm supposed to do. Just tell me what I do and what are you going to do? And I'm going to ask them to take this piece of this national manufacturers getting the test kits and the vials and the cotton swabs and the chemicals. And if they get that done for the national manufacturers, and then the national manufacturers can feed my 211 labs, then the states can take it from there.
Governor Ali Chewy from 7 Eyewitness News here in Buffalo. Thanks again for joining us. There's continued frustration over unemployment. We have folks calling, emailing daily saying that 72-hour window where they were promised a phone call back has come and gone. What can you say to them, you know, to ease their frustration, and what's being done to smooth the process?
Yeah, this is, they're right. They are right. I'll tell you the bad news and the good news. The bad news is there were so many unemployment claims that it has collapsed the unemployment department's system, their website system, their phone system. We have 1,000 people who are now working on that unemployment website and phone call system. I mean, it's unbelievable. 1,000 people just to take the incoming unemployment calls. That's how high the volume is. And they still can't keep up with the volume. And there's nothing worse than being unemployed and nervous about a paycheck, and then you call for unemployment benefits and you can't get through on the phone. I get it. I get it. And we have 1,000 people working on it. We have Google working on it. We have all these experts working on it. But they're trying to bring up a system, again, that did a much, much lower capacity. This is 100 times whatever we've ever done before. The good news is this. You're going to get the same benefit anyway. It's not like it's costing you money, right? I know it's frustrating, but once you qualify, the qualification is retroactive, so you're going to get the same benefit. It's not costing you any money. It's not that because you couldn't make the call today, it means you're not going to get the benefit. You will get the benefit. It's just an annoying delay. And believe me, people are working 7 days a week on it. Let's take one more.
Governor, as far as your regional committees go, have those regional committees started meeting yet? What is the timetable for that? And what will it take for you to say, okay, we've got enough data, open up this particular region?
Okay. There are no committees here. This is, we've always talked about the economy of the state in terms of different regions. Manhattan is not Buffalo. Let's use that same regional template when we talk about reopening. Let's look at the numbers for that region on the COVID virus. Let's look at the hospitalization rate. Are we on the ascent? Are we on the descent? Are we on the plateau for that region? Hospital capacity for that region, infection rate for that region, and then let's be open to making a region by region determination, right? So look at that region. Who does that? The state does that, working with the local governments. That's it. There is no new committee here. There's no new process. It's just
Bob Duffy is leading up.
yes. Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul in Western New York will be not just focusing on that decision. It's more the when and the how, right? Let's take Western New York. When do you reopen it? Like all these governors in all these states are trying to figure out when. Well, look at the data. Look at the hospitalization rate, look at the infection rate, and tell me where you are. Are you the ascent, plateau, the descent? CDC has guidelines. You have to be stable or declining for 2 weeks. Look at the CDC guidelines. Talk to the local officials. The when is data-driven. It's not when do you want. If the question is when do you want, my answer is I want it yesterday. Okay, it's not what you want. It's data-driven. All right, so look at the data. Kathy Hochul will coordinate that with the local officials. And then I think the better question is, and when we reopen, what did we learn, and how do we reimagine Western New York to be the better for it? And what lessons do we want to take forward when we do the reopening? And then on the reopening, how do we phase it? What businesses first? Do we do it by percentages? Let's talk about all of that. So it's the when and the how, data-driven on the when. Not political pressure on the when. Well, people are yelling at me. I want to open because I don't want to take the political heat. If you don't want to take the political heat, you shouldn't be in the political kitchen, which is called being an elected official in the state of New York. I have to get to Washington. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Schumer said that a vote on the stimulus could come today. There's no state money in that right now. Do you have hope that could change by the time they vote on it?
I think it's a terrible mistake not to provide funding for the states. I get small businesses. I get airlines. How about police? How about fire? How about healthcare workers? How about teachers? We're not going to fund schools? I don't get it. I don't get it. That's why I'm not in Washington. Thank you very much, guys.
Republican lawmakers saying you can start phasing in now. Is now the time?
Great job. Thank you very much.